Theodosia Barton Prevost, also known as Theodosia Barton Burr, born in November of 1746, daughter of single mother Anne Stan Stillwell. Her father died in a carriage accident in Shrewsbury, New York in 1746, when Anne was still pregnant with Theodosia. Anne raised Theodosia half in Shrewsbury and half in New York City, where most of Anne's siblings lived. Two of Anne's sisters at the time were married to two military men, where she met and married British Captain Philip de Visme in 1751. Anne had 5 more children with Philip, all half-brothers and sisters to Theodosia. Philip died in 1768, leaving Anne to raise her children alone again at age 49. Theodosia at the time was age 16. There is no written record about Theodosia's schooling, but her knowledge extended above the common privileged woman in the area, her having great knowledge on languages and reading. At age 17, Theodosia married James Marcus, a young British officer at Trinity Church in the lower region of Manhattan. Within a couple months into their marriage, James was ordered to leave New York with his group to Charleston, South Carolina. Theodosia accompanied him there, but she didn't stay for long. By the end of the year, she was pregnant and James got permission to take her home to stay with her mother. However, there are no written records of a child being born of them in 1764, making the theory arise that Theodosia either had a miscarriage or is possibly faked to be sent home. Later, James was assigned to a detachment of troops at Fort London at the Pennsylvania frontier, returning home to Theodosia, who was in New York in 1765. 2 years later, James purchased 150 acres of land in Bergen County, which is in New Jersey. Then he also bought 102 adjacent acres along with a 2-story house the couple would later name the Hermitage, after a philosopher, which I will put up here, which is located in Montgomery, France. Over the course of 5 years, 1766 to 1771, the two had 5 children together, 2 boys and 3 girls. The eldest boy was John Bartow, born in 1766, and the youngest boy was Augustin James Frederick, born in 1767. Not quite as much is known about the girls, and Louis, born in 1770, and Mary Louis, born in 1771, and Sally, birth year unknown. During all this, they were also building another house along with multiple mills located near the Ho-Ho-Cuz Brook. When they were complete, they sold their previous house and 68 acres of their land to Theodosia's mother, Anne, who was again widowed at the time. They then called their new home Little Hermitage. In 1772, James' unit was in the British Army, also known as the Royal American Regiment, who was ordered to travel to West Indies. In November of that year, he sailed from Perth Amboy to Jamaica to command a battalion. He was back in New York the following year, 1773. 2 years later, in 1775, he received the royal grants of 5,000 acres in New York, where he invested in other properties, soon in conjunction with Anne. By the mid-1770s, there was increasing tension between the Americans and the British, and later events would dramatically impact their household. In 1776, James was called back to the field with his regiment. While this took place, Theodosia took charge of the Hermitage with her 5 children, mother, and half-sister. They survived warfare from 1776 to the early 1780s. Additionally, Theodosia had to fight the ongoing threat confiscation of her house, which we'll get back to in a moment. Her efforts included welcoming Patriot officers and government officials, including Marquis de Lafayette, General William Alexander, and Alexander Hamilton. Now back to the topic of confiscation. There were many people who wanted to send everyone in the building to New York City and take the Hermitage as a trophy. Theodosia continued to fight the attacks by sending petitions to authorities in New Jersey. In September of 1777, Amber was in the same regiment as Theodosia's cousin, Captain John Watkins, making it very likely that Theodosia met Burr at the time. In July of 1778, Theodosia invited General George Washington and his men to come and stay at the Hermitage, stating that the home was the most commodious in the area. Washington accepted her offer and stayed for 4 days. Later, Amber was put in charge of bringing leading Tories, American colonists loyal to the British, to the Hudson River under a truce flag. Theodosia and her half-sister was a passenger on one of Burr's trips down the Hudson to visit relatives. Over the course of 5 days, Theodosia and Burr got a chance to get to know each other, Burr's health being compromised by exhaustion, so he spent some time healing at the Hermitage. Soon after, he received the command to the Westshire Line and brought discipline to the troops. But illness and exhaustion continued to follow Burr, causing Washington to allow him to retire from the army. It took Burr over a year to fully recover. He then studied law and continued to visit the Hermitage and spend time with Theodosia. During all this, James became second in command to his brother in a successful campaign in Georgia. After Savannah's capture in 1778, he was a British governor of Georgia for a short period of time. James asked Theodosia to send their 2 sons, who were still young, ages 9 and 11, to the south to follow in their father's footsteps. At the end of 1778, a New Jersey legislator passed a law for confiscation of properties owned by Loyalists, and the Hermitage was a prime target. Threats continued over the home for 2 years. But in November of 1780, she was informed that there are inquestants found and returned to the Court of Common Pleas, held for Bergen County on the 4th Tuesday in October last, against the following persons, to wit, James Marcus Prevost. The final decision was to be rendered in January of 1781. The idea of confiscation disappeared from records and letters from both involved parties. It's possible that the help of Aaron Burr and many others took effect, or because James was no longer fighting against America. In early 1780, James' health was compromised after being sent to Jamaica. Soon after, he sent his sons back home to Theodosia, and they reported of his poor health. In early 1781, Burr was quite dedicated to the law, commonly spending over 16 hours a day studying. Though most of this year, Burr and Theodosia's interaction was through correspondence, for a decent amount of his time, Theodosia stayed with Burr's sister, Sally Reeves, in Litchfield, Connecticut, for unclear reasons. In May of that year, Theodosia wrote to Burr, "Our being the subject of much inquiry, conjecture, and calumny is no more than we ought to expect. Your esteem to attract the observation of those who visited the house. Your esteem more than confiscated of the worst they could say. When I am sensible I can make you and myself happy, I'll readily join you to suppress their malices. But till I am confident of this, I cannot think of our union. Till then I shall take shelter under the roof of my dear mother, where by joining stock we shall have sufficient to stem the torrent of adversary. You speak of my spirits as if they were at my command, or depressed only from preservatives of a temper. In these you mistake. Believe me, you cannot wish their return more ardently than I do. I would this moment consent to become a public mendicant, should I be resorted to the same tranquillity of mind that I enjoyed this time 12 months. The influence of my letters, my hope on your studies is imaginary. The idea is so trite that I ask in hopes it was worn from your mind. My last year's trials are vouchers. I was always writing with a view to please you, and has often failed in the attempt. If a desire for my own happiness cannot restore me to myself, penury of motives never can. I wish you to study for your own sake, to ensure yourself respect, and independence to ensure us the comforts of life. When Providence designs to fit our heart for the enjoyment, I shall never look forward with confidence, till your pride extends to that. I had vainly flattered myself that pride was inseparable to true love. In yours I find my error, but cannot renounce my idea of its being a necessary support to, and the only security for, permanent affection. My health and spirits are neither better nor worse than when you left me. Adieu, Theodosia Prevost." I apologize for all the mispronunciation. Theodosia lacked the beauty of Burr's previous lovers, but she had a sharp and intelligent mind. The few letters left today shows us what bond the two had together, an interest in ideas. By fall of 1781, Burr had finished his studies. Now Burr had to fight through 3 sittings of the Supreme Court, who had the power to allow Burr to practice law in New York. But he had a big problem. You see, it was required for a candidate to practice law needed to be apprenticed for 3 years, but Burr barely finished 1 year. Even with those odds, Burr continued to push, stating, surely no rule could be intended to have such retrospect as to injure one whose only misfortune is having sacrificed his time, his constitution, and his fortune to his country. But the judges continued to delay their decision for months, which allowed Burr to visit Theodosia once or twice during that time. Sadly, in 1781, James Marcus Prevost died of wounds he suffered earlier in the war. On December 30th, Theodosia's half-sister, Kathy, wrote to Burr, "If you have not seen the New York Gazette, the following account will be news to you. We hear from Jamaica that the Lieutenant Colonel Prevost, Major of the 60th Foot, died at that place in October last." While this allowed Theodosia and Burr to get married, there was no rush. Burr was still trying to be allowed to practice law, while Theodosia had to think of the 10-year age gap. Thinking about his less attractive traits, to clear her head, she spent time with relatives after the new year. Burr obtained his license after the court took his military service into consideration. He obtained his license on January 19th. He continued to study and obtained the highest rank by April 17th of the same year. He didn't open his own law office, which was located in Albany. He later got invited to Kathy and Joseph Brown's wedding, and he arrived early and they all agreed to make it a double wedding. On January 2nd, 1782, 35-year-old Theodosia Prevost with 5 children married 25-year-old Aaron Burr at the Hermitage. After the wedding, the newlyweds settled in Albany, but they moved to New York City a year later. During their marriage, Theodosia gave birth to 4 children, but only one survived, a daughter named Theodosia Burr, named after herself from Burr's insistence in 1783. Theodosia managed a succession of increasingly affluent homes in New York City, along with a summer home in Westchester County near many of her relatives. She oversaw Burr's law office when he was on business trips and helped raise their daughter, who Burr took great pains to educate her, promising to make her equal to any man she would meet. In 1789, Burr took a United States Senate seat from Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler. Years later, Theodosia became severely ill with cancer, and despite the hard-working doctors at her bedside, she died of stomach cancer on May 18, 1794. In the last year of her life, she inspired her husband to open a school for young ladies. He partnered with Madame de Senant. Burr was devastated and didn't get married again for 40 years, at age 77. He stated he couldn't find another marriage partner he loved like Theodosia. He also stated, "The mother of my Theo was the best and finest lady I have ever known." This goes to show, no matter how educated, no matter how rich, and no matter how powerful someone is, it doesn't make a person. Theodosia didn't grow up rich, but she earned it. Not many people can recall this fine lady when they hear her name, but that doesn't make her any less amazing. She is one of the strongest women I have ever had the pleasure to learn about, and I believe she needs to be known better. We already know about the strong men in history. It's about time Theodosia gets her own chapter. Let's be the ones to write it.